Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Malkin Fund, May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and my guest today is perhaps America's foremost diviner of political attitudes and opinions. Indeed, when he first joined me here in June 1975, he and former U.S. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance had just founded the Public Agenda, which went on to publish its long series of distinguished reports designed to help our leaders better understand the public's point of view, while helping average citizens better understand the true nature of critical policy issues. Well, back then, I asked my guest whether he thought it fair for anyone to take the position that he knows what we as a people think. His reply, right from our transcript of 31 years ago, quote, "I think it's not too difficult to learn what people say, but that's really not always the same as knowing what they really think." Well, Daniel Yankelovich has just written still another totally intriguing book, this time about American business attitudes, published by Yale University Press, and titled Profit, spelled P-R-O-F-I-T, with honor, the new stage of market capitalism. And I want to ask my guest today whether he's confident enough about what the business community in America really thinks to assume that it will or might adopt the stewardship ethics he calls for so vigorously in his new volume. Dan?
Well, I think that business is torn, and then it becomes a judgment about which direction it's going to take. In the post-scandal, the scandals came about because of the enormous cross pressures on business for short-term profitability. And at the margin, some companies cheated and they got involved in the scandals. But the pressures cut across the entire business community. And now in this sort of Enron, end of Enron trial days, the question in my mind is which direction the business community is going to go. Part of the reason I wrote the book was to hope to give a nudge in the direction that I think it should go, which is the direction of stewardship ethics.
It feels that way, Dan. It feels as though you're not totally convinced yourself of that direction.
Well, I'm totally convinced that it's the right direction.
It should go in that direction.
Yeah, I'm not totally convinced that the business community as a whole will go in that direction. I'm encouraged by seeing some of the companies that are moving in that direction. They are companies big and small, and there's a definite movement in that direction. What I say in the book is, as a corporate director in many companies, I encountered 3 levels of corporate ethics: staying within the law, the smell test, and stewardship. And the people who sort of look to their lawyers to tell them whether they can do something or not, or how to get around the law to do it, in my experience, have been the minority. The bulk of companies that I've worked with have been in this middle category, the smell test, where 1 or 2 directors will always say when something comes up, I don't care whether it's legal or not. If it doesn't pass the smell test, I'm not going to support it.
That's not good enough for you, is it?
No, because it's negative. It's negative. It means something stinks. It means something is wrong. It doesn't point in a positive direction. And my feeling is that today's large corporations are just about the only resource the world has for dealing with these momentous problems of world poverty and global warming and the other challenges that we have. Governments aren't going to do it. They may lead the way, but if you don't have these corporate resources mobilized, these things won't get done. Technology is a wonderful tool, but you have to deploy technology in imaginative ways and in ethical ways to advance the public good.
What about Adam Smith's, if we're talking about capitalism, what about Adam Smith's magical, mystical hand?
Invisible hand.
Yeah?
Invisible hand. Well, part of the message of my book is that sometimes the invisible hand works. A lot of the times it needs some help.
From government?
From within the corporation itself. That's where stewardship ethics comes in, because the pressures within the corporation are between short-term and long-term. And I think the most dramatic example, I've always found the automotive industry to be so symbolic of trends in American culture. And indeed it is when you look now at, say, General Motors' decision to go the Hummer and the SUV, and Toyota's decision to go Prius. One was thinking of short-term profits. The other was taking a longer-term point of view. It wasn't with government help. It was decisions made within the corporation, their strategy, the way they looked at the future, the way they interpreted their stewardship ethics.
And what do you do about that?
Well, what you do about it is, first of all, you get the leadership of companies to make up their mind on how they're going to handle their own ambivalence. The cross pressures of hedge funds, of Wall Street, of investors, of shareholder value ideology, are all on short-term profits. So you have management that has to somehow find the balance between the short-term interests of the shareholder and other constituencies, employers, employees, the public, consumers, and how you reconcile all of these forces and move toward the public good. At the moment, I think that the majority of corporations are in that smell test level, and my hope is that as they see the challenges ahead of them, and they see the advantages, the practical advantages of a stewardship ethic approach, they'll move in that direction. That's my main basis for optimism, is the pragmatic, practical advantages. There's a concept that I've been working with that I call trust equity. And trust equity is the trust that the public, consumers, people have in the company. And once you start taking shortcuts, once you start going down the wrong path, you lose that trust equity. You've lost something extraordinarily powerful. Look what's happened to companies like Merck, over 100-year-old company, a company that was the hallmark of integrity. It not only lost a lot of reputation, it lost tens of billions of dollars in market value. Shell, with its playing games with reserves, lost enormously. The Boeing, Citicorp, across the board you have examples of companies that are not caught up in scandal, but they're caught up, AIG, Health South, caught up in shortcuts and ways of sacrificing the long-term viability of the company to short-term profitability. It doesn't work. The other way works beautifully. So I think what I would say about the book that I like a lot is that the timing is good, is that with the post-scandal period, with the Enron trial up front as the book gets published, I think that there's an open-mindedness, if I can use that phrase
You may.
here. There's an open-mindedness to business it doesn't always have. And as it thinks through how it's going to resolve its own ambivalence, go short-term, go long-term, I hope that the thesis of the book carries some weight.
What do you mean by stewardship ethic?
Well, the notion of stewardship is that if you're a leader and the steward of your organization, you leave it in better shape than when you took it over.
But what's the definition of better shape?
Well, I think the essence of stewardship is caring. Who you care for, what you care about. If you only care for shareholders and for your executives, you embrace something like shareholder value. If your care extends to employees, to the public good, to customers, then you have a different set of concerns. You become a steward, and you practice a form of stewardship ethics in the form of that kind of caring.
And how well do you do competitively?
Well, I'll give you a couple of... See, you have these conflicting cross pressures. What employees want, what customers want, what investors want, what the community wants, they don't automatically come together. As I said, the invisible hand doesn't always work, doesn't work a lot of the time. So part of the trick of management and the genius of management and leadership is to find out how to reconcile these demands. Some of my favorite examples of stewardship ethics are companies like Starbucks and Southwest Airlines, Wegman supermarkets, where they motivate their employees to be nice to the customers. So you get a twofer there, because the employees are incentivized to go out of their way to cater to customers. It makes the customer happy, and you get a result where the companies in the Fortune 100 best companies to work for, their return, their total return over a 3-year period is almost triple that of the S&P 500. So it's clear that from a hard-nosed quantitative point of view, that if you approach it in the right way, you can do better.
But Dan, when you say it's clear that in a hard-nosed way you can do better, why then does that fly in the face of so much that we have been reading about, talking about, hearing about in the business community over a period of years now?
Yeah, no, there's a couple of reasons. Business community expresses the larger culture. It's inevitable. They're part of the larger culture. And in the larger culture, an ethic has developed that I think of as an ethic of unenlightened self-interest as compared to one of enlightened self-interest. In today's language, if you were talking enlightened self-interest, you'd say, well, it's win-win. I win, I make out when you do well. The unenlightened self-interest ethic is a zero-sum. I win only if you lose. In looking at survey data on the reaction to Enron, the public wasn't all that troubled about a lot of the fraud or executives enriching themselves. But what agitated people at sort of the 90% level was the idea that the executives of Enron were making out at the expense of employees and small investors and the like. So that's where the problem lies. And I think it is the difference between short-term and long-term. The notion of shareholder value, where you put shareholders first, the rationale for that is that if you serve the shareholder, you also serve the other constituents. Now, the honest defenders of that position will acknowledge that that's true only in the long run, not in the short run. And since that's interpreted from a short-run point of view, and since the owners, the so-called investors, 32-year-old mutual fund managers, not grandma, not long-term investors. You have companies that have to respond to these pressures.
You made quite a point of quoting Pete Peterson here, of pointing out to the rest of us that there is such an incredible turnover in the holding of stocks in companies. That notion gives larger.
I mean, if the image of shareholder value is grandma holding on to old AT&T stock, God help her, that's not the shareholder. The shareholder is a sharp MBA with a degree in finance, in and out, zero loyalty. Now, the idea of running companies for the benefit of those people makes no sense whatsoever. But that's the way the system works, and it's reflected in the larger culture.
But you see, Dan, when you say, but that's the way the system works, and you add that it's reflected in the larger culture, I don't know where Dan Yankelovich comes up with a fairly optimistic statement in this book.
Yeah.
Small as it may be, it's brimming with optimism.
Oh yes, absolutely, because I think things will move in that direction. I think that at any one moment, if you take a cross-section look at the country, you can be pretty despairing. But if you take a longer perspective, at least up to now, Americans have had a practical, pragmatic, can-do, optimistic attitude. This is the first era I remember where Americans seemed to be incompetent in some of the things that this country is doing. It's just a terrible shock to me. That gets us a little bit away from the theme of the book, because these corporations are competent. I'm just thinking about our government.
Well, but thinking about our government, you can't avoid the conclusion that the wisdom that you express that wisdom almost in the same words that FDR used in his Commonwealth Club speech in 1932 in his campaign when he spoke about saving capitalism.
Yes.
But what's happened to those notions today? We have gone through.
Yeah, but take that historical example, because it's a very good example. And the right attacked FDR venomously as the enemy of capitalism. And in retrospect, it was clear that what he was doing was saving capitalism. And if you look at the despair of the 1930s and the state of capitalism then, and what has happened subsequently, you see that FDR did succeed, and capitalism was saved and has gone on to be a much healthier beast and has gone through several stages of evolution.
Oh, Dan, in my documentary History of the United States, I have a chapter called The Roosevelt Revolution. And I look at it now and I ask myself, well, I say to myself, there must be a counter-revolution, because what I thought of in writing about those days as the permanent revolution, the permanence seems rather shaky. Would you write, every time you write something in this book, I think to myself, if only those words could go directly to God's ear or eyes. Yeah. But that's not the case.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you characterize the permanent revolution. If you characterize it in terms of a sort of government control, that was one aspect of the FDR revolution. But if you characterize it in terms that you just did, of taking actions to save capitalism, it's worked out extremely well. World capitalism today is a lot healthier than it was in the period of FDR.
Why are you, I was going to say so vehemently, strike that. Why do you lean so heavily in a direction that is anti-government regulation? In a direction.
No, I don't.
You don't?
No. No, I'm not a conservative anti-regulation
You're a liberal
person.
anti-regulation person.
No, the position I take in the book is that when you have these basically ethical scandals, attempting to deal with them through the law isn't going to work very well. And I think that is the case, that, you know, we in this country, we're very well lawyered. Our solution to our problems is to go the legal route, to pass a law, to pass a regulation. And that's fine for the things that require it. But for the domain of ethics, for the domain of social norms, the idea of trying to deal with them through regulation just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes, but the businesses they got away with for a while, for a considerable period of time, for many hundreds of millions of dollars put in, not the wrong pockets, but into pockets where they didn't.
Look, I agree with you. I'm very explicit. I think one of the main reasons for the scandals was deregulation, because deregulation made the so-called guardians, the watchdogs, into enablers. That when you took away some of the law firms and the accounting firms and the banks with the deregulation, they just went over to the other side. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences did a study where they came to the conclusion that 50% of the scandals could be directly traceable to the influence of law firms and accounting firms and other guardians, the watchdogs, who turned around and augmented and encouraged the scandals rather than stop them.
What's your guess, really, just between the two of us and the others who are watching? What's your guess as to what's going to happen?
Well, my guess is two things. One, in terms of the society at large, and two, in terms of the business community. You talking history, talking Franklin Roosevelt, I'd like you to hark back to the McCarthy period. There was something extraordinary about the McCarthy period. As people of our age lived through it, it looked as if it was going to go on forever. And then one day it was over. It was just over. One day, it was gone. It belonged to the past and the country moved on. And I think that that's going to happen here. I think that we're living through, struggling with a post-9/11 threat, which we've responded to in a somewhat dysfunctional way, and that will pass, and we will move on to something new. What that something new is maybe difficult to say, but it isn't going to be what we are living through today. In terms of the business community, I think the world economy is in remarkably good shape. There is more liquidity than I think has ever existed in the world economy. You have countries like India and China who are becoming the engines of economic growth, not just the American consumer, which I think is good for all of us. So I think we're entering you have the explosion of technological resource. I think we're entering an era which has enormous potential for overcoming poverty, for dealing with a lot of our technological problems. And a lot depends on what these companies do.
It's so strange to me to hear you say, and one day McCarthyism was over, unless you add there are many people who feel that one day, maybe it was the day that the Supreme Court gave the presidency to George W. Bush, one day the groundwork was laid for a resurgence of attitudes that are not that far removed from McCarthyism. And you say it's over. It was over.
No, I say
then.
McCarthyism was. I'm not going to say that it was an unusually dramatic moment. My perspective on what's going on in the country today is that we're living through something of a backlash. I think that the concern with religion and the rise of religion is a symptom of our ethical confusion, that under a period of stress, people fall back on absolutes, absolute values, absolute ethics. And we're living in a period of great relativism that is the heritage of the 1960s and 1970s. This is a much more tolerant, pluralistic country than it was when I was growing up, much more open for opportunity for all. But it also is a country whose moral compass is a little bit askew. And I think that we're struggling with that. There's a backlash against the extreme individualism of the last 20 or 30 years. And as a backlash, it's not a trend. It's not going to move in that direction. It's going to work itself out and find some ground that is not as extreme, I don't think, as the ground we stand on.
Dan, where do you get this, it's going to work itself out? Maybe everything works itself out, but why do you assume it will for the better?
No, I don't. Where I get it from is not sort of a Panglossian optimism. I'm a student of social trends. That's my field. I've been looking at social trends for a half century. And they don't move in one direction. They're not incremental. They're not linear. One generates, I call the process lurch and learn.
I love that.
That our society lurches to one extreme, and then it gradually learns, and sometimes the learning is sound learning, and sometimes it's not so sound.
And I just learned we have 25 seconds.
Well, then that might be a good note on which to conclude.
But it's an optimistic note, I guess.
I feel that we're moving in a good direction. I hope the book helps nudge business leaders to move in a direction that I think is good for business and for the society.
Profit, P-R-O-F-I-T, with honor. Dan Yankelovich, thank you so much for joining me today on The Open Mind.
Thank you, Richard.
And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time. If you would like a transcript, please send $4 in check or money order to the Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York 10150. Meanwhile, as another old friend used to say, good night and good luck. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Malkin Fund, May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.